Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Startup Impact Summit, a virtual conference in 2020. So we are super excited to jump on Growth Impact stage with three amazing ladies today. And they are going to walk us through their journeys, growth, mindset, how to stay productive, and how to manage your teams all over the world. And they're going to share lots of best practices with us. So we are super excited to hear their insights. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to the stage to our moderator, Tracy, to kickstart the sections. Please give round of applause. Great.
All of us. Hi, thank you so much, Felix, for having us on here. And of course, we're super thrilled. My name is Tracy Wong. I'm the founder of Voor 3D. We are a B2B virtual solution for the fashion industry. And our goal is to leverage on digitization to help the fashion industry become more synchronized, agile, and truly sustainable. We're based in New York, but then everything can be virtual and digital now, so our business can be worldwide. And I guess next person, Joyce, you wanna introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Tracy. Hi, everyone. My name's Joyce. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Alariss Global. We're a global talent marketplace, reversing the brain drain and connecting great talent from around the world to high-impact roles in the emerging markets. Really happy to be here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We do email copywriting for some pretty cool brands like Shopify Plus, Doodle, and Tailwind, all sorts of really cool SaaS companies that are global. I work remotely from the Copy Hackers team and my own team members from my own company. So yeah, just working with international clients and also working with international colleagues has been very fun.
So this panel here, not just, not only that our own business is very global oriented, even this panel itself, all of us is in a separate location. Felix in Hong Kong, I'm in New York, Joyce is in San Francisco, and Nikki is in Israel. So let's hop into some of the questions. I guess, this is for both of you guys. Tell us more, or tell the audience more about what you do, and what was the reason that puts you guys on this journey? And I'm guessing, maybe Joyce can start first.
Sure. Well, I think with many founders, and I'd actually also be curious to hear from both of you what got you started on the journey. For many founders, I think there's just this urge to create something that you see is needed in the world, however big, however small, and that for whatever reason isn't there. And so sometimes it's a personal, something personal, and sometimes it's just an observation. And I guess for me, it was a little bit of both. Being the child of immigrants and being born and raised in the US, I'd always felt kind of a special status as kind of a bridge connecting US and China, talking to friends in the US about my experiences overseas, being able to talk to family overseas about my experiences in the US. And over time, I really wanted to work in Asia because I'd lived in the US my whole life, but actually found it really difficult navigating that process. At the time I'd graduated from Harvard, I'd, had good work experience. I knew it wasn't for lack of qualifications. It was simply just a lack of network or knowledge or awareness of how things worked in another country, and especially of how something as network driven as the job search process worked. So that was in many ways something that started to inspire me. And even 10 years ago or so, I had notes where I was writing out there should be some sort of private sector Peace Corps or some program that helps people who really want to move overseas or have an impact in another country, get a great job, do something where they can feel like they can contribute. And so that was the start of my journey. It was many years in the making, and I think it's the accumulation of many experiences from working in public sector, private sector, as well as big companies and small companies, and also other startups in Silicon Valley, just learning the ropes and learning how everything from how companies are founded to how hiring managers make decisions to what is the landscape of the future of work. And how is this rising tide of greater development coming from the emerging markets impacting the global economy. So that's a little bit of my process.
Great, great. What about you, Nikki?
Well, I definitely agree that many founders just see a lack and want to fill it. There's an internal joke with copywriters and marketers how like eventually the SaaS marketers kind of just build their own product and start marketing it too. Because yeah, you see a need and you're good at something, and so you just want to build it. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens sometime soon. But yeah, I was originally in creative copywriting, naming companies, branding companies, and I was starting to get frustrated that it just wasn't measurable, and it was very subjective. You know, what's a good name? It's whether someone likes it or not. So I kind of fell into the world of conversion copywriting, and email marketing is just, it's never going to die. It's a great way to build relationships with companies, with your customers, and just, you know, it's that life cycle and that relationship. It just has so much potential and so much ROI. So I really just fell in love with it, and here I am.
Nice. So yeah, I mean, like going back to what you were saying earlier, you know, like some people, if people see the need, then they're just gonna go and build it themselves. I'm actually one of those people. I'm one of those non-technical founders, but then, you know, like in the fashion industry, I have over 10 years of experience, so I have the extensive domain expertise, and because I was in it, I've seen so many problems and issues, you know, like within the whole process that I was in, and I was the one living through it, and you know, like, and that's exactly what brought me, you know, like to what I'm doing now. You know, is anyone gonna build it? It's gonna be me, instead of, you know, like other tech people that's trying to come into the fashion industry without really understanding the you know, the workings of it. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about, you know, like your personal background and how it helps to bring you guys to a more international stage. For me, myself, I was born in Hong Kong. I grew up in San Francisco, and now I'm based in New York. Both my parents, they travel a lot. They actually travel every single year, and I've been to a lot of countries, you know, when I was a kid. So that said, you know, like this, I guess, you know, like my upbringing is something that definitely, you know, like toned me, or, you know, like groomed me to see this world as a whole, instead of, you know, like, oh, I live in this country and, you know, like I just belong to this country, or I live in that city, or that I just only, you know, I'm from that city. Yeah. So who want to go?
No, that definitely resonates. As I alluded to in my introduction for why I founded the company, you know, growing up as a child of immigrants, but speaking another language and always being really interested in other countries, I think you just realize that the world is so much bigger than, you know, your own backyard, and there are just so many opportunities to collaborate, and especially now with technology. I mean, the fact that we're based in 3 different time zones and many different cities and can still have this conversation is truly incredible. And you can build trust and build relationships with people through, you know, things like copywriting and emails, or through a phone call, or through some other means of collaboration. So there's something that's really inspiring about it. And I think that I even, you know, noticed this trend of globalization at a young age. Now, when I tell people we're reversing the brain drain or doing reverse outsourcing, they start to get it. But even so, most people can't wrap their mind around it, because they think of the world in a certain order of, okay, the, you know, North America and Europe are the, you know, the places where the countries have a lot of wealth and money and people want to immigrate there. And then other emerging markets are where people want to go, you know, away from. But that's definitely not the case. There's so much growth and there's so much development happening. And I think sometimes being able to connect the dots globally requires just talking to different people and having that mindset that the world has so many interconnections and synergies.
Yes, definitely. That resonates so much, because I was in my little American bubble until I grew up and moved across the globe. And suddenly I was an immigrant, and I was like, oh, wow. all the immigrants that I knew growing up weren't stupid because they didn't speak the language. They were just struggling because it's hard to learn a language. And, you know, they had talents and skills, and they were amazing, strong, really brave people for making this huge move. So it was definitely a process to start expanding my mind and accepting other cultures and, yeah, all these like underprivileged countries and emerging markets, and they're full of amazing people doing amazing things. And it's an incredible thing that we're connecting the world with technology, and that companies are reaching across and building remote teams, because you learn so much and you can serve so many more people when you expand the way that you think and you step outside your own little bubble. So yeah, it's definitely been a very interesting process, and I'm excited, and I'm really happy that we made the move. Even if like we're not planning on moving back, but if we did, it's just given me such an incredible viewpoint into diversity. So
Yeah.
Right. So being global and being international definitely, you know, like haven't applied to everybody yet. And when you guys are conducting business, you know, like in another country that you don't, that's not your own, what are some difficulties that you guys encountered, and how do you guys overcame those difficulties?
I think there are, well, this is certainly one of the key tenets that we're trying to tackle, that you know, it can be challenging because there are a whole assortment of things like language barrier, cultural norms, or even just ways in which contracts are perceived or enforced. And I think that oftentimes it just fundamentally comes down to a question of trust. Like if there's someone who's very different from you, and you know, there are so many studies about this, like why are even schools and workplaces trying so hard to have diversity? Because when you start getting exposed to different people and start humanizing them, there's a lot more trust built up. And if you don't have those interactions, there's a lot of othering that happens. So one of the frameworks I always try to use is, how do I build trust? How do I show value? How do I show that I'm being authentic? And even if it's in a way that, and you know, and then we'll make mistakes. We'll all make mistakes. There are certain countries where, you know, it's you need to shake hands. Although I suppose now with COVID, who knows? There are other countries where people expect kind of like, you know, a kiss on each side of the cheek to show that you're being more. There are other countries where, you know, using your left hand is deemed inappropriate. And there are so many norms, and like both implicit or explicit, that sometimes it's easy to sort of miss them and to make a mistake. But again, if people trust you and know you're trying, or if you're trying to speak their language but you're not, you know, making all the right grammatical choices, they give you the benefit of the doubt. And I think that that's really important for us to give each other the benefit of the doubt, and for us to really demonstrate that we're making an effort, and at the same time to kind of let things roll off your back if they don't go exactly the way that you want them to go. Because I think the days in which there's a gold standard of, okay, everyone needs to abide by this, you know, sort of legal system, is sort of becoming a thing of the past. Because as there are more countries with their own ways of doing things, and their own norms of engaging in international business, you sort of have to adapt, especially if you want to have them as clients. So I come at it with a very sort of humble and growth mindset of just wanting to learn and wanting to demonstrate that I'm trying.
I think it's so cool that you have a framework for being trustworthy. Like you're not just like trying, you're trying. It's really cool. I would say, like, I'm so grateful for the startup community for being so forgiving and so open. I think it's a pretty unique thing that, yeah, all the challenges have just been technical. How can we work around this? You know, yeah, the contracts, the payments, the language, all that kind of thing, versus, you know, I'm not trusting you, or, you know, you did something to offend me. Like, it really has just been technical things that are so easy to work through compared to, you know, the more personal, interpersonal kind of things.
Yeah, trust, I feel like it's definitely important. Again, I was just having a conversation with Felix the other day. My whole team here is remote, and the startup mindset here in the US is, oh, like you guys are remote and you guys are able to achieve, like to this point. It's something that's generally viewed as, like it's a positive thing that you guys are able to follow that lean startup strategy. But when I was in Hong Kong and I was meeting different clients, and when they hear that my whole team is remote and we don't rely on an office, and they're like, "What kind of company are you guys? You guys don't even have an office." It was something that was like frowned upon, like so that type of mindset, as well as like something that definitely like took some credit away from the trust and reputation, like just because we don't have an office. So yeah, it's definitely something that this is one of our challenge, like knowing how, like how different mindsets are, like in different countries, and whether or not they would even care about, like things like that. So as a female entrepreneur, like I myself have definitely taken this in stride, and there's a lot of advantages for female entrepreneurs, but at the same time, there's also a lot of disadvantages for female entrepreneurs. What about you guys? What kind of advantage or disadvantage that you guys have had in the specific field that you guys are serving?
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely think you framed it correctly, Tracy. There are advantages and disadvantages, I suppose, from my own. And so I think the disadvantages are kind of clear because people talk about them a lot. There's a very small percent of funding from VCs go to female entrepreneurs. Women are often asked questions that are sort of different or harder than men. They're asked about like all the things that could go wrong, or like really pushed on certain aspects, whereas men are just asked about like what's the growth potential and a lot of positive things. So there are a lot of these things in the VC world, and then in the client world, there's the fact that a lot of clients, especially those in, let's say, certain geographies, they haven't gone through the diversity and inclusion training that's become really common in, let's say, Silicon Valley. So they don't mind just asking very bluntly questions that highlight your gender in a way that makes it clear that they don't think that you're the authority figure because of your gender and things like that. So there are those things, but I tend to like to focus on the positive, because certain things like that, it's hard for me to really, I could complain about it, but I still need to push ahead. So I think that being female gives you an edge in making you seem more trustworthy. So again, it comes down to trust. I think in many cultures, for better or for worse, people perceive that women are more likely to be honest. Women are more likely to, not lie and not play sort of games, and that they're more likely to do things that are sort of for the benefit of others, even more humanitarian, I suppose, for lack of a better word. And so there's that aspect. I feel like they're more likely to trust me. In some ways, they're more likely to like me, even being an Asian female. But an American, I think I get the benefit of having, these resources and having a background that people respect, but then they're more likely to feel closer to me and feel more comfortable having even more of a friendship than just a client relationship. And so I do think that's to my benefit as well. And then, finally, I do appreciate the fact, and I've been a beneficiary of sort of diversity initiatives where different organizations say, wow, we don't have enough women. We need to promote more female founders. We need to promote more founders of color. And again, this is a concept that my clients in Asia would find very odd, because they're like, what's this, because I look like everyone else, but in the US at least, where only Asian Americans are 6% of the population. And so I do think that there are benefits to that, of being able to get more resources and mentorship in this particular day, which was, of course, not even the case a few years ago. So I think there are a lot of benefits. And I'm also very lucky because my co-founder is male, and he's someone who is very good at uplifting women and being someone who, is cognizant of the privilege he has in the space he inhabits and how to make sure that others are able to have that as well. And so oftentimes I notice, let's say at networking events, people will gravitate towards him because he's tall, he's Caucasian. So, you know, there are certain things that I think make them think that he is someone who's important. And he is, of course, he's a great person to talk to. But he will always be very thoughtful and respectful and say, well, and here's our CEO, here's Joyce, like you should meet her. And so I really appreciate that about him. And I think allyship is so important, and having allies who are cognizant of these things. Even what Felix had told us earlier, that, you know, with Startup Impact Summit, they wanted to have a diverse panel of speakers, and gender is one of the key metrics that they measured themselves on for saying that, you know, they succeeded in getting a diverse set of speakers.
That's great.
Yeah. I don't know how I'm going to top that one off. You covered everything. Yeah, I feel like the struggle comes more from the very subtle nuances of, just like you were saying, you know, with the trust and the likability. Like on the flip side, you know, we have to work a little bit harder to feel more professional and to give off that more professional stance, because we're automatically kind of more on the likable side. So yeah, just more like the subtle nuance kind of things versus actual opportunities lost. You know, the world's kind of changing from that, thankfully. So it's, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity now and a lot of recognition that there are differences and we have to account for them. So it's cool.
Yeah.
Tracy, what about for you?
Luckily, you know, like I started here on the New York side, you know, like of course the US have a much more diversified mindsets than, you know, like China or some of the other countries that I've been to. And especially, you know, like we're right in the time where women's founder, you know, like women's empowerment. So we're right in the right time. So that's actually, you know, like, you know, timing is also everything. So that's, of course, you know, one of the advantage for me, as well as, you know, I'm sure for you too. The disadvantage is that maybe for my industry specifically, and especially the whole fashion industry here in New York, they still operate on a very traditional mindset, and a lot of the people that have been in the fashion industry, they're much older, you know, like male. They've been doing the same thing for like decades, and then out of nowhere, out of the left field, you know, like there's this little Asian girl that's like coming to tell me, oh, you know, like this is how it's going to be in the future, you know, like that's definitely not something that they wanted to see or hear. And especially, you know, like dealing with some Jewish companies, you know, like not that they just have the way of doing things, you know, and it works, you know, it's been working for a very long time. It works. And sometimes, you know, like I would have, well, you know, like one of my male teammates, you know, like speak with them, you know, it's just that for whatever reason, you know, like the trust there seems to be a little bit more when they're speaking with a male team. Yeah, so that's the disadvantage for me.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was going to ask how it goes with fashion, because fashion is like a female industry, but it's so male dominated. So it's like that interesting.
It is. Yeah, you would think it's very female, but all the executive level, you know, all the C-level are still very male, you know, like the people who are in business, and they started to be in, you know, they started this whole fashion industry in New York like long time ago. Those are mostly male. I think some companies are even before, you know, like female came to, you know, like the big scene of business. And that was like, I don't even know how many decades ago. Yeah.
Well, we're glad you're fighting the good fight. So, you know, female executives coming in.
Yeah, definitely. Although on the West Coast, you know, in LA, the fashion industry is a lot more open-minded, and especially in Europe, it's also a lot more innovative and a lot more open-minded. But I don't know why, for whatever reason, you know, New York is supposed to be a very progressive city. Maybe it's just my industry here in New York. Yeah. So let's see. Now, circling back to remote teams, my whole team is remote, and and I just absolutely loved it. We don't have to spend time commuting, and we can use those time, like to work on things that we need to work on. What do you think this world has changed, like surrounding the thought of remote teams due to COVID-19?
Yeah. Well, we are a mostly remote team as well. My co-founder and I both live in San Francisco, but everyone else is spread all over the world. And for us, it sort of makes sense. It's on brand because we're a global talent marketplace. So, we kind of practice what we preach, so to speak. And if we tell the clients that we work with that you want to leverage the best skills and the best talents, and where you're born or where you grew up doesn't necessarily have to dictate your destiny of where you work, then we do the same. And in many ways, of course, the elephant in the room, I suppose, of this is COVID-19. How has that changed things, and what's sustained change, and what's going to revert back to the norm once, a vaccine is found? As far as remote work and remote teams go, there was already a trend. There were quite a few kind of big name startups that had already begun that trend, and they made it very publicly known. And they would do things like, pay above market rate salaries, or even hire people from like all over, like, Scottsdale, Arizona, or Reno, Nevada, but they'd be based in the Bay Area. And they would give that flexibility, and they'd have like, 1 or 2 sort of team retreats or team outings per year. And that used to be seen as really odd. But I think COVID-19 has just accelerated things that were probably already on the trend. It would have probably taken many other companies about a decade to get there, and they had to get there in like literally a month. And many of them aren't going back. I mean, Twitter, Jack Dorsey announced that Twitter is going to be indefinitely work from home, and many other large tech companies, like even Google and Facebook, are not mandating anyone come into the office except for really essential certain roles until like early next year. And what's also, again, back to that theme of trust that I guess I always think about. In the past, our online reality was a reflection of what happened offline first. So we would first meet a friend, go to college, meet them, and then add them on like Instagram or Facebook and message with them. But now a lot of our relationships, like all of us, have never met in person. I feel very close to all of you. I feel like I really know you well now. And we've entirely made our relationship virtual. And maybe in the future, we'll go from online to offline once we can travel again, and I visit New York, or, I go through Israel. But this is really the new normal. And I don't think that it makes a lot of sense, frankly, for most companies to revert back. And we spend so much, there's such high fossil fuel emission and carbon footprints from business class planes just for one meeting like on the other side of the world. There's so much spent on just like the people being really tired, and also on commercial real estate. So I think this is exciting. I think the trend is really exciting, and it makes the playing fields much easier for smaller startups to compete.
Likewise, I totally resonate with what you're saying. When the whole COVID-19 happened, and a lot of people were asking me, oh, like, how's your team? Is everything, like, still working fine? I'm like, we're working perfectly fine, because we're already 100% remote. And like you said, if anything, it actually accelerated. It actually accelerated, the adoption of what we're doing. And because, one of my core principles of the company is to leverage on digitization to reduce waste and carbon footprint. So that's one of the things, like we've been telling people, like remote is good. What about you, Nikki? You work with a lot of companies and a lot of startups everywhere. So obviously you're already remote, but when you're working with them. So
yeah, and I also had the experience of working in an agency, and then working with a remote team, and then working remotely from, like, I've kind of experienced it all. So it is interesting. There are some things lost when you are working remotely, but there are also so many gains. What I'm interested to see is how they're going to make it sustainable long term. All these new companies that are coming on board and saying, yeah, we're going to do remote. Like you see companies that bring their teams together to meet, or, just, kind of have these virtual summits, or just there's so many different ways of keeping your team connected. So I'm curious to see how all these big companies that are jumping on board with remote, what are their strategies going to be? How are they going to, be influencing other remote companies? It's very interesting. Morning Brew, which is like a newsletter, they sent out, like randomly in the middle of May, I think it was, they sent out an email with a fake newsletter of what reports they would be giving if COVID-19 had not happened. Like, what would today in May look like if it wasn't COVID? And one of the pieces that they had was how, some big company was talking about maybe going remote in like 2023. And then they said, scrap it. Like, we can't, it's just too hard. And it was just such a good flip of how reality now, so many companies have accelerated and are going remote and went remote. And, big companies that were saying they would never go remote. So it's just really, it definitely pushed more companies further. And I also hope that many of the people that weren't forced to go remote aren't resentful of it. And because it's such a different remote world when you're forced into remote and you don't have a good setup, and you don't have your files, and you weren't expecting it, and you're not set up properly. It's all Zoom. It's not collaboration in a healthy, good way. So that's kind of what I was alluding to with all these companies, how they're going to make it work long term. Like, how is this transition going to happen in a healthy way that this can be sustainable for them? Because I think it's amazing if you can, again, globalization, getting in more talent, like, it can only make them grow faster. So it would be great if they could get it sustainable.
Yeah.
What about some ways to... Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I do agree with Nikki that there are challenges, and there are people, I think, who are going to be sort of left behind, so to speak, when as we shift so quickly. Those who don't have access to high-speed broadband internet, and that might sound very simple for us, because we're obviously dialing in from our homes and able to use Zoom, but there are many people around the world and in many parts of the United States who don't have the bandwidth to even have Zoom meetings like this, and so it's easier and easier to sort of get left behind in that digital divide. And then those who, I suppose, of certain generations, if it's harder for them to adapt and they still prefer that FaceTime collaboration. So I do worry a little bit about the increasing inequality that might come. And as much as there are opportunities for the future of work, because then it's a more even playing field, anyone from around the world can compete for jobs, then I also think that it puts a lot of pressure and potentially a lot of downwards pressure on wages, because more and more wages, or more and more work arrangements are contract-based or project-based. And so the question that I often think about or ask is, how is someone, let's say in Michigan, where I grew up, competitive for the same kind of jobs now that, oh, cool. Someone from Bangladesh can also compete for the same exact job. Like, they can't compete on a salary level. And not even just someone from Bangladesh, it's also some automation. Like, when AI is, and software is so sophisticated that a lot of these jobs, even radiology or like accountant jobs, are starting to get automated. Like, how can we upskill and reskill people so that their work still has a lot of value? So I see a lot of these transitional kind of frictions, and I'm very curious to see how we will continue to address those as a society.
I'm actually curious, so you compared Michigan to Bangladesh. When do you see later on down the line, when we're truly global, the salary, it's going to be a more, like, I would say, an average global salary, whereas, instead of paying less for people in other countries, now people in other countries, want it, it's more pay, similar pay on the same level as if you're in the US or in the UK. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question because I think a lot of companies are even grappling with that right now because now that they're letting people work globally, a lot of people are saying, well, the Bay Area is so expensive. Maybe I'll move out to somewhere much cheaper and then I don't have to pay income tax even because certain states, and I'm just saying US specific, but I'm sure this trend is continuing all over the world. Certain places don't even make you pay income tax. And then companies are saying, well, if you're, the reason we're paying you so much is because you're living in the Bay Area and we're competing for Bay Area talent. But if you're moving elsewhere and you're paying lower taxes, then we will adjust I think they call it something euphemistically like we're going to adjust your compensation according to your geography and we'll use your IP address to track where you are. And to me, that feels a little unfair on some levels. Like you're doing the same work and yet you're getting paid less based on where you live. Granted, the cost of living is lower, but I think on the macro level, like part of it is because it transitioned from offline to online. If you start fully online and then they're saying, we're going to pay you for the work that you produce, we don't really care what the color of your skin is, what your nationality is, what language you speak, where you are, how old you are. Like we're very egalitarian. We'll just pay you for your output. In some ways that feels that feels like it's a more fair playing fields, but I think the implication is that those who live in or have previously been part of this privileged, like being privileged to have been born in the US, like that's no longer going to allow the salary to perhaps stay at the same point. And so in some ways, that's why I said there's downward pressure on salary. I don't necessarily see people paying more for someone in Bangladesh. I see them paying less for someone in the United States. And that does concern me. And I think part of it is if there's too much concentration of capital in a few big companies versus more distribution, like more smaller mid-sized businesses. And ideally that would lift up sort of the output of everyone. And so everyone, I think, every human has unique dignity and also unique value they can provide for society. And so even if it's hospice care, for instance, I think that's something you can't replace a human with machinery or a robot or software anytime soon. And that's very geographically specific. And so if that's the case, then perhaps that would just be matched with the supply and demand in that market. And so I think there will be a market equilibrium point, and ideally it will be a good fit for people's skills, people's outputs, and what they need to sustain a good lifestyle. But again, like for some of these online and remote work situations, it might just mean kind of like downward pressure on salaries until the adjustment later.
I see.
I have been seeing that in terms of like offshore developers. They're kind of raising their prices, but then the American developers are kind of having to lower them as well to match all the offshore talent that is coming into the market. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it keeps developing.
Time will tell, right? Some ways that you guys can maintain that productivity or maintain that discipline while having like this big remote team that's scattered like all over the world. For me, of course, we rely on Slack. Like we heavily rely on Slack, on Asana, and we make sure that we are meeting at least, like once a week, I keep telling my team, communication is the key, communication, and build the rapport. Even if you guys want to tell the team what you're eating for the night, let us know, So that's one way that I keep them, like kind of on the same page. What about you guys?
Yeah, I definitely agree that communication is really key. And part of it is like, I think part of it is also getting the right people, hiring the right people, where if you empower them, they do really good work and you don't need to micromanage. I mean, I know there are a lot of software solutions out there, or even some companies where they just make everyone sort of live stream their work. So they turn Zoom cameras on like 100% of the time equivalent. And so they can tell everyone's like in front of the computer at like working in tandem. And I personally don't really like that. I think one of the benefits of work from home is that if you have children, you can take care of them when you need to. And if you have, like I am on calls with different time zones all the time. So I like having that flexibility and I like giving the team the flexibility, but it is challenging.
Yeah, I think that was kind of one of the things that I found detrimental working in-house was, yeah, you were chained to a desk for certain hours. And even though it was an agency that was very much like, yeah, go chill on the couch, take a book, if you need to ideate and, like we let, but it didn't really feel right to go be reading a book on company time, even though you do need some space in the creative process. So yeah, this whole idea of peak hours, being in this specific period of time and the best place to work is at a desk. Definitely with remote, it's, I don't want my teammates working in a specific time unless obviously we're connecting for a meeting or something like that. But having the flexibility to work when it's best for you or best for your family or whatever it is, like that's one of the most beautiful things about remote. So that shocks me that they're streaming their work. Like wow.
I know.
It's really true that it's about trust. You have to hire the people that will output, even if they're not being watched, and will and care about working and are motivated and have enough focus to work remotely. So yeah, I think that's something that will become more of a norm as remote becomes more of a norm. That's that you don't have to be working these hours, that you can be working on the couch, and that's fine. All these different kind of like, this is how work is done, will kind of expand, which is also interesting because there is something really nice about, crisp suits and the heels and working at a desk and, like the corporate, like professionalism. There's something to that too. So it'll be interesting to see how that whole marriage happens, but, yeah, productivity it's really just about, figuring out when you work best. And I think even realizing that adapts. Like I was always a morning person, but then now I'm working on a different time zone, and a lot of my clients are American or Canadian or at nighttime. So now I'm working a lot more at night and not working in the mornings. And I don't see my productivity, I don't see my output, decreasing in any way. I think you kind of just adapt to what your situation allows for, and you can just push yourself to whatever productivity you want if you really want it enough.
Nice. I think we're almost at 40 minutes here. So quickly wrapping up, what are the next step in your professional mission? Like the next step that you guys want to do, I guess, like in whatever that you guys are doing great as of the moment right now.
Well, I guess for us, continuing to scale and grow, we want to become the one-stop shop for any global expansion plans that people or companies would have. So I think it's just expanding our reach, partnering with more clients, and helping create more opportunities for people around the world.
And Nikki?
So I a lot of startups get in touch with me and ask like, we can't afford you, what can we do, how can we work with you anyway? So I'm starting to build a community and membership where we could give that support and help startups, because email marketing is so crucial, especially in the beginning. So to be able to give that support on and also the community aspect itself would be so helpful. Like you need that community, you need that support in the beginning of the journey. So that's what's next for us.
For me, definitely, like continuing to redesign the whole fashion industry, one brand at a time, but at the same time, because this is so new for the fashion industry. So the next step for us is definitely, like trying to engage more in education, like telling brands how they can go through a digital transformation without a whole massive of risk involved, or or what they can save, like how much carbon footprint they can like lower in terms of the operations and whatnot. How can the audience get in touch with you guys? For me, it's easy, like our website is here, and am I pointing to it? or oh, I'm not sure my finger, but anyway. So we have a form on our website on www.voor3d.com, and on our website there's also a link to our Instagram, to our Twitter, and for anyone who wants to get in touch with us, with me or with my team, shoot us a message on the website, or just shoot us a message on Twitter, Instagram. Either way is fine.
Great. Well, oh, here it is. I'm like, I wasn't putting up the blue screen. Our website is alariss.com, alariss.com. And you can add me on LinkedIn. I'm just Joyce Zhang. If you search Joyce Zhang Alariss, you'll find me. Our Twitter is @Alariss Global. We're also on LinkedIn. And yeah, please get in touch if you want to, if you feel like you're a good fit for some of the jobs that we offer, or if you're a company trying to hire and expand globally. We work with companies like ByteDance and Xiaomi and many others that have really great products and teams all across the world. So looking forward to getting in touch.
I made the mistake of wearing blue today, so the virtual background did not work. So yeah, nikkielbuzz.com. If you could see my name, I could point to that. So yeah, that signs you up to our email list, which keeps you in the know about industry email related stuff, startup related stuff, and also that membership if you are interested in joining. And then LinkedIn and Twitter, those are my other hunts. So yeah.
Hey, Felix, where are you?
Great, I'm back, and thank you so much for the amazing conversations. I just can't wait to build on top of something where we can, take it further. And we're about time. Again, thank you so much for coming in. We know we have been located in different time zones and regions. Really appreciate your flexibility.